So yes, over to you, Kate, to hear a little bit more about what this looks like in practice.
Thanks both. So hi everyone. As Susie said, I'm a professional advisor for UNICEF UK's Rights Respecting Schools Award programme, and I'm based in the north of Scotland, working with schools there. I only joined UNICEF UK in December, and prior to that, I was a primary school teacher in Glasgow. Like Susie said, I was responsible for both Learning for Sustainability and Rights Respecting Schools Award. So I'm not actually talking from on behalf of UNICEF today and sharing my experience of that. I'm going to be talking about my past experience as a primary school teacher and my kind of experiences connecting learning for sustainability and children's rights. So my background in primary teaching, I started teaching in London over 10 years ago, and in 2018 moved up to Glasgow. And I think what struck me was the really strong emphasis on learning for sustainability, children's rights, and the really kind of progressive movement within the Scottish curriculum and the Scottish education system, which was great to see. So I was very enthusiastic about that. And it is something that when I was teaching, I felt was kind of missing in the English curriculum. So it kind of started out with my enthusiasm, and then I was asked to take on the role of rights respecting lead. And seeing as I was asked to do both roles, I was kind of actively looking for connections between the two, for my sake, but also for the other teachers and practitioners, and also to try and make sense of it as a bigger picture, I suppose. So in terms of rights respecting, I led the school as a rights respecting coordinator to achieve their gold accreditation last year, and learning for sustainability was a very big part of that. So I'm going to talk about that today. So next slide, please, Kirsten. Thank you. So I know that this has already been shared by Susie, but I think it was Kirsten actually. But I thought I'd just highlight this quote from Education Scotland's guidance document. It's called A Whole School Community Approach to Learning for Sustainability, because I feel like it highlights the aims, the shared aims of learning for sustainability and children's rights to education, both for whole school approaches that weave together different topics and ways of learning. Both approaches include each other and share a lot of common content. So you can teach about learning for sustainability through a rights-based approach, or about children's rights through learning for sustainability. Thank you. Next slide, Kirsten. And again, this slide, I know that this has been shown multiple times now, but I suppose it really does highlight those connections really clearly visually. So I think it's a useful infographic to share with staff as well, to kind of really illustrate that. I've highlighted the words and concepts that I thought were really clear connections between children's rights education and LfS, but really any of them could be connected. I suppose if you're thinking about a child rights-based approach, then as long as you're linking to the impact on children and their rights, then any of those words could be justified. And I suppose in terms of things like that I haven't highlighted, in hindsight probably should have, for example, like outdoor learning as an approach, being quite active learning, allowing children to take lead in their learning, and also kind of the health and well-being aspects of that. So yeah, one thing I thought would be worth noting though is that in rights respecting schools, learners are encouraged to identify and take action on sustainability issues, both locally and globally. But it's important to link these issues to children's rights. So like Susie was saying, in terms of like climate justice, so when looking at climate change, looking at the impact on children, and thinking about equity being a very strong aim and concept behind both approaches. So next slide, thank you, Kirsten. So I thought it might be useful for any teaching practitioners who might be here to kind of just briefly highlight the direct links between the Rights Respecting Schools Award and Learning for Sustainability. So the Rights Respecting Schools Award, for those of you who don't know, is split into 3 strands. So strand A, teaching and learning about rights, strand B, teaching and learning through rights, and strand C, teaching and learning for rights. And that's kind of very similar to the approach that Kirsten spoke about earlier towards learning for sustainability. The strands are then split into outcomes, and part of the award accreditation process is asking schools to evidence how they meet those outcomes. So learning for sustainability work is a big part of that, and in my role it overlapped a lot. So a lot of the evidence was very much linked to our learning for sustainability work. So here you can see in outcome 1, there's a focus on where and why some children may not be able to access their rights, and linking to global issues, sustainable development. And next slide, please, Kirsten. Thank you. And so then in outcome 2 and 3, you can see here again, the concept of equity and fairness is mentioned, talking about dignity and prejudice and discrimination. So obviously that can link to learning for sustainability as well. And next slide, please, Kirsten. And then again, inclusion, healthy lifestyles, thinking about, I suppose, if you're teaching about those, you could be teaching through an outdoor learning approach, different pupil-led learning approaches. So how you're learning is a way of connecting the two as well as what you're learning. So thank you. Next slide. And you can see here, strand C is all about participation, empowerment, and action. So this is really where the two really clearly link. Outcome 9 in particular is all about enabling young people to have the skills and the possibilities to take action to claim their rights and others, rights of others locally and globally. So it's about advocacy, campaigning, and raising awareness as global citizens. So thank you. Next slide. Thanks, Kirsten. Thank you. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how I connected the two approaches in my role as Rights Respecting Coordinator and LfS Lead. So I'm not an expert by any means, but this was my kind of way of making sense of it and connecting the two in my practice. So I started out by kind of undertaking quite a lot of CPD related to learning for sustainability, global citizenship, and rights-based approaches. I worked quite a lot with WASDEC, who were great in Glasgow, and I think there's regional offices around Scotland, but they were wonderful in terms of providing like such great range of training and resources and advice in terms of learning for sustainability. So that was really useful for starting me off. UNICEF UK, we also offer, as part of the Rights Respecting membership, we also offer training, which is really valuable, I think, to kind of get your understanding and other staff members' understanding before you kind of move forward with a whole school approach. So once I'd begun to develop my understanding of two areas, I created school policies to outline the aims and expectations of the two approaches to share with staff. So learning for sustainability, we did a separate briefing for. It included quite a wide range of things, including outdoor learning, but we also then did a separate briefing for children's rights. So kind of very closely linked and reference each other at times, but we did do separate briefings for those. here you can see it highlights the reference to IDL, so interdisciplinary learning, and meta skills, is that's how we chose to plan explicitly for children's rights education and learning for sustainability. I think a lot of schools do that in primary school level, and I know at high school they tend to do it from more of a social subjects approach. But we found this was kind of the easiest way for staff to engage and think about it as a whole school approach, an interdisciplinary approach. However, other curricular areas also allowed for teaching of both areas and of approaches. For example, outdoor learning, play-based learning, and active learning approaches. So next slide, thank you. So this is just a extract from the Rights Respecting Schools Award. It's Teaching and Learning Toolbox, which you can see Susie's put the link to in the chat. So it provides advice on how to approach each of the strands I mentioned before in the Rights Respecting Schools Award. And again, I've kind of just highlighted some explicit links between the two approaches. So you can see that there should be clear links with global citizenship and sustainable development. Topics and interdisciplinary learning lend themselves well to learning about rights. And you can see as well here it references the world's largest lesson, which is a website of resources created for children to learn about the UN global goals, which I will come to soon. So the children's rights policy provided an overview for staff and guidance for teaching about, for and through rights. And yes, next slide, please. So for teaching through rights then, one of the links is sort of the way in which children are learning. So through different approaches that I've mentioned, but also things like debating and philosophy for children, things that encourage critical thinking and discussions of global citizenship. So I suppose those skills that a global citizen would need as well. So next slide, thank you. And then for strand C, all of this guidance is relevant, and very explicit links between the two approaches are very clear. So I won't go through all of them, but as I've highlighted, just to say that children in rights respecting schools develop a strong sense of social justice and knowledge of local and global issues from a rights perspective. So that's, I suppose, a shared aim, like I spoke about earlier, and linking very close to becoming global citizens and fully embedding learning for sustainability within the school. Thank you. Next slide. So on the other hand, then we had our learning for sustainability policy, and this was kind of framed around the UN global goals, which provided a context for teaching about, through and for children's rights, but also learning for sustainability. For me, these are the easiest way of connecting learning for sustainability and children's rights. They both impact people and the planet and share the aims of LfS and children's rights education to build a socially just and sustainable and equitable society. I think it makes links really clear for staff and for children and young people. It kind of provides a clear, consistent, contextual framework for planning and teaching. And we can often say on in the rights respecting schools training that one pupil that someone worked with once referred to them as the world's to-do list. And from our perspective, thinking of the global goals, we recommend them because the thinking is if all of the global goals are achieved, then children's rights will all be being met. So they're very closely linked, and I think they are really useful for highlighting those two links between the world, climate action, global citizenship, sustainability, and children's rights, and how all interlinked they are. Next slide, thank you. So I think Susie's going to put the link to this. Oh, she already has in the chat. Thank you, Susie. So this was a really useful document that UNICEF UK have created for mapping the global goals to children's rights articles, explicit specific articles. So this was very useful for teachers when we were planning and for making those rights explicit and sharing that with the young people as well. On page 2 of this document, it mentions the aims of it, and it says that it aims to encourage an in-depth and broad-based exploration of the links and synergies between the global goals for sustainable development and the UNCRC. So that's the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And the intention is to challenge users to look for comprehensive and less obvious connections between the two frameworks, so as to reinforce their potential for mutual advocacy and implementation. And I thought that kind of really summed it up, like that's the aim of both approaches. And all the work that you're doing for one will apply to the other. So next slide, thank you. So as I mentioned before, we planned for both learning for sustainability and child rights education through interdisciplinary learning. So through our topic planning and our kind of other curricular areas as opposed to the key core curricular areas. So we had meta skills planning documents, which if you're a teacher in Scotland, you'll be aware of the meta skills, but I won't go into that now. So that's how we planned for learner experiences, but as a way of tracking them, we created these really simple frameworks because we didn't want to create any extra work for teachers already under pressure to kind of cover a lot in the curriculum. So we thought this is a really clear way of ensuring that all of the global goals are kind of covered over their time in school, over the stages. So we had a first level and a second level tracker, and this would get passed on for one teacher to the next so that they could try and get a range of focuses on which global goals they were covering through their topic interdisciplinary learning. It also allowed for children to choose the topics first, to come up with ideas on what they'd like to learn about. A very commonly suggested one was chocolate or computers, things like that. But they can then be linked by the teacher to these global goals or by the young people. And then the links are really kind of clear. So once you start thinking about how things link, there's so many different ways you can go with it. So we found that these kind of the previous document and this just helps teachers to kind of start making those connections without actually changing much of what they were doing already, but just kind of making those links more explicit. So next slide, thank you. And this is just a similar tracker that we created for tracking teaching about children's rights, just to kind of try and ensure a range of coverage of different articles in the convention, so that over time the children in the school would become aware of all of the articles, and thinking about how we can make them contextual and relevant to them, rather than kind of just referring to them in passing. So next slide, thank you. So this is the final slide. It's just a kind of selection of useful resources if you are working in education. So the UNICEF UK guidance is the guidance that the Rights Respecting Schools team provide, which has a link. The ones I've listed are those that have a link with Learning for Sustainability explicitly. And then we also have a Spotlight CPD resource, which can be used in staff meetings or in service days. So I've included some links to relevant resources from that. And then we also offer training courses, which might be useful for anyone who is doing this in practice. So we've got an introduction to global citizenship and strengthening global citizenship, which again very much highlights those links between the two approaches. And then I've also mentioned some other useful resources that I found really valuable when I was in my previous role. Like I said earlier, WASDEC and ScotDeck were fantastic. Also, Oxfam's Global Citizenships Guides are really useful. And there's the Global Goals Book Club as well. So learning through texts was a really easy way of engaging with the global goals and children's rights education, but linking the two as well. So something as simple as discussing the two concepts whilst reading a story is one way of kind of making those connections clear. So I found that really valuable too. And yeah, I can share that in the chat for anyone who's interested. So thank you very much. That's me.
Thank you so much, Kate. My goodness me, I've been scribbling away here, taking notes and ideas and learning from you. What a fabulous journey. My goodness me, lovely to see it from your perspective as an educator, and also as someone who now works on the Rights Respecting Schools programme. I just made a few notes there, and I just wanted to reflect on some of your comments before we perhaps open the floor to any questions from those who are here tonight. I loved the way that you talked about, when you were outlining some of the ambitions of the RRS award, this idea of participation, empowerment and action by young people, because that is LfS in a nutshell. It really is, the synergies are so clear between these two things, and I love the way that you've woven them together when you were in school yourself, and showed the ways in which they both enhance and feed off each other. And I think that's really important to realise that these are one and the same, essentially. You can't have one without the other. I also really liked the way that you referenced a couple of times that you weren't asking staff to do anything extra. You were just asking them to reframe and structure things slightly differently, look at things with a different lens. And that was a key ambition of the original One Planet Schools report, which led to the National Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, that this was not asking anything extra of our already incredibly busy educators. It would be something that would be woven across everyday practice through a different lens. I really liked the way you outlined that collegiate approach between the staff in the school, the way that people were planning this together. They were looking at that idea of progression between the different levels, and the way that obviously children's voices themselves were enabled and supported to be heard. And what better way to learn than through chocolate? I mean, my goodness me, you can do the whole curriculum through chocolate. I love that idea. That's wonderful. And I suppose my final, really liked the way that your young person talked about the UN global goals as the world's to-do list, because they really are. And when you look at the goals, you think, well, why wouldn't we want to achieve these things? And doing it through the lens of human rights and children's rights is such a powerful way to go. But yes, so I wonder if anyone here tonight has any questions for Kate. We'd be happy to take them if you wanted to pop anything in the chat or unmute and ask a question. Unfortunately, I can't see the chat because I'm sharing slides, but Susie, perhaps you could be my eyes and ears on that if possible. But yes, is there any questions for Kate at the moment? Okay, right. Well, we'll maybe move on then, if that's okay.